Hey everybody, Jamie from the Marine Doctors YouTube channel. Let's get things underway here. So, I had some good videos that I popped up last week. We can chat about those. I just need to track them down again. I had them up in my on my computer, but I had to bounce around a little bit. I'll just make sure that this is muted so that doesn't go through. Good. And if I can just get it to show me chat, we'll be set. There we go, there's chat. There we go, now we're underway. Okay, so we did some videos on... I gotta get back to that, sorry guys, sorry. My videos... We go all the way back. Should I rebuild that 60? I don't think I covered that in my last video. I'm looking back, and I think I missed a couple weeks of live streams. I think last week I just completely blanked out, forgot. I went out with my wife, and we went shopping, and I got home like at 1 o'clock, and I'm thinking, oh, I did do a stream. Oops. And then I didn't bother with a follow-up post, because my community posts, they don't seem to be seen all that well, so I didn't bother with that. So I'm thinking, geez... back November 2nd, I think was the last one I did, maybe. So I got some catching up to do for you guys. So that 60 horsepower, I still haven't opened it up. And the reason that I have... Oh, good morning, Chris. Thanks for tuning in. The reason I haven't opened it up yet, again, is the cost factor. It's got some other issues, and again, I just don't know the value that I'm going to get out of it. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll make a phone call tomorrow. There was another guy that was interested in it, and if he can say, yeah, I'm going to take it, then, quite possibly, then I'll dig into it a little bit deeper. But for now, that one's on the back burner. But I still have 7 engines that I need to put together. I'm still waiting for the power head to show up for my daughter's engine so that I can throw that together. And all the other engines are at the machine shop getting measured up so that I know which pistons they need, so I can order the pistons and then get them all cut and sent back to me so that we can get things underway for that. And how was Chris this morning? I appreciate you tuning in. Where we go here? Next was... before you store your boat is what that was. So just lightly touched on storage fog, premium fuel again, and fuel stabilizer. So if we do those two things for sure, which is fuel stabilizer and storage fog, we're in a much better place for the following year. Premium fuel again lasts a little bit longer, but doesn't ensure that your fuel is not going to go bad unless it doesn't have ethanol blended or alcohol in it. Then it'll last a bit longer too as well. I also talked a little bit about why don't they just put that stuff in right from the get-go when they create the fuel, and it's because the fuel gets used so quick in the automotive industry that it just would be not cost effective to do that. So we would be paying a little bit more per liter or per gallon of fuel, so it's just not worth it. So 99% of the world goes through fuel very quickly. Our industry, we go through it, well, as you guys know, quite slowly in some circumstances. We then turn. Oh, this. You know what? This was good. Turn your 90 horsepower into a 115. So I looked at the 90 versus the 115 Johnson Evinrude product, and it's pretty straightforward. If you can find yourself a donor engine, if you can find a donor engine, heck, you can have a 115 inside of a couple hours. Yes, you can. So you would replace the carburetors. So the 90 has 1 3/16 carburetors, and the 115 has 1 5/16. And a quick note, and I didn't find this out until later, was they also, and I knew that they made 100 horsepower, but I was thinking, well, how did they get the 100 out of from the 90 to 100 to a 115? If you just change the carburetors from the 1 3/16 to the 1 5/16, that nets you the 100 horsepower engine. If you do the exhaust changes as well that are required, that gets you up to the 115 because you can flow the fuel and air and fuel mixture out easier, or the exhaust moves out easier and more efficient. So that's that was kind of nice to see, and I wish I would have put that into the video, but unfortunately I just didn't know that at the time until I stumbled over to a box that I have. I've got an engine that's torn down that's 100 horsepower, and I looked at the carburetors, and sure enough, they're 1 5/16. So yeah, that's the difference. So if all you can find or do is change out your carburetors from 90 to 115, or sorry, to the 100, from the 3/16 to the 5/16 borehole, right? That'll net you another 10 horsepower. I don't know if that would be a game changer like the obviously the 25 horsepower would be, but it's easy enough to do. Okay. What else did I find? We changed the exhaust and we go to the bubble back, and we put the deflectors in. I think they call them stuffers is what you put in, or what they're called, and that directs the exhaust more efficiently to get it out of the engine, so then we should be able to achieve a higher RPM and then create more power. And the other change was high compression heads, so they're going to be a little bit shorter. I don't know if you can see this with the eye. I don't know how much of a difference it really is, but think as the piston moves up to the top, if we've got a large space, that's a lower compression. If we can pinch it ever so slightly, we'll increase the amount of compression that's created inside that combustion chamber and increase power. So I guess the next thing is, and this would be cool if I could do this on the dyno, and I think if I was to do it on the dyno, I'd have to rig up something that's not analog but something digital, is what if I took the heads off and took them down to the machine shop and had some thousandths taken off of those heads to see if we can create even more power. So I don't know what the baseline compression is with the 90 versus the 115, and to be honest, when we do compression tests on these engines, and yeah, I've done thousands of them, I don't really look for an engine to have, say, 115 pounds compression, whereas the 115 would have 130, right? I still find that some 90s still have 125 to 130 pounds of compression. So is it that later on they just started making one run of the cylinder heads themselves, and was it really 90 horsepower at that point, or did we actually have a little bit more power? But again, if they're running the inch and 3/16 carburetor, we're only going to have 90-ish at max, or ever so slightly increase that horsepower. I don't know. I don't know if that was something that they did later on. That would be an interesting thing to maybe look up in the parts catalog to see if those heads were the same later on versus the original set that were put on 90s. So if someone wants to go ahead and research that, throw it into the comments, that would be fantastic. What else did we get into? We got into why guessing boat engine repairs can... So basically, the estimate challenge, when someone calls in and says, or someone stops in and they say, hey, how much does it cost to repair a certain item on an engine? And Chris, I see your comment there. I'll get over to it real quick here, but I'll finish up with this what I'm talking about here. The estimate, for example. So when a customer comes in and they want an estimate, sometimes it's really hard because you don't really know what's happened or been the history of the engine. So if someone comes in and they say, hey, I'd like to get my water pump done, and you say, okay, it's X number of dollars, based on if everything goes right. If stuff doesn't go right, so we've got corrosion, or we've got seals that we find that are damaged, or we've got oil leaks that we have to trace or pressurize the gear case, things like that, all of these things compound and start to cost more money. So what I would typically do in a situation like that, and I've mentioned it in the video, was I'll tell the customer, okay, it's X number of dollars if it's a straightforward repair. If it's not a straightforward repair, number one, you're going to get a phone call. And number two, we could escalate our estimate to be Y number of dollars. So X versus Y. So we're going to try and come somewhere in between these two numbers. And then if we can't even get inside those two numbers, they'll get a follow-up call and say, okay, this is what we found. So let's say, for example, I've seen this tons. Customer comes in with a water pump that's not functioning. Okay, while we're in there, we take a look at the seals and we notice that a seal is cracked. So the seal may not be letting oil come out, but it's definitely letting water in, right? So especially if it's the drive shaft seal. So we can physically pull gear oil out of the gear case and run it through the engine and fire it out through the exhaust and not actually see it present on the water pump itself, or see it leaking out, depending on how bad it is, or depends on which seal, for example, has failed. So then we call the customer and say, okay, water's been getting into your gear case, would you like us to go further? And they'll say, well, yeah, maybe check that seal and see what it's okay. So you pop the bearing carrier out and you look down and stuff is rusty. Okay, so now we've definitely gone beyond, we're getting a seal repaired as well as replacing a water pump. So it starts to escalate, the price starts to jump up, but you've covered yourself because you've pre-warned the customer, hey, this is what could happen, and B, we're keeping you in the loop the whole time and letting you know that we've found different things, rather than the customer showing up, instead of it, say, being a $300 bill, they're handed a $1,300 bill, or they've got a brand new gear case because everything was rusty on the inside. That's how I don't put the gear case on, but that's the kind of the direction that we head when a customer comes in and they would like an estimate, right? Or if it's over the phone, they say, well, how much is a tune-up? Well, a tune-up is, say, for our time invested, $300-400, right? So that would maybe include spark plugs and things like that. But if we start to find other things, we'll apply that labor towards that repair. So, for example, if we're just going in and checking the water pump and we've coded, say, $300 in labor, it will use that $300 in labor to replace that water pump, because it's not really going to be any more work because we're disassembling the water pump in the first place. It's things that would come after that. Chris says, worked half a day yesterday, moved 150 bags of pellets into my cellar by hand, cleaned off the deck, and took the wife out for supper. Not going to do jack today other than sipping coffee and watching you. Well, thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate that. I do. It's much better when people actually watch your live stream. And a little bit of history, guys, is my live streaming stuff. I guess I did the odd one with the Marine Doctor many years ago, which was, I think, done off my phone at the shop and not in this setting. But I used to stream video games, so I actually do have a history in streaming, but unfortunately it wasn't this stuff, it was video games. So yeah, I actually did a lot of work on Twitch. I spent probably 2, 3, 4 years on Twitch. Did I get big on Twitch? No. I want to say that I think I peaked at around 5,000 followers. I think that's what they're called on there, if I remember correctly. And I think the most views I would ever have had maybe was 30 or 40 at one time. Chris says, do you think there are better off financially? Do you think you are better off financially running your own shop compared to have to work as a marine dealership technician for a period of the same time? Yes. So how this works is I get my normal hourly fee that I typically would, right? But because I have more responsibility now, I also get we'll call it a premium on top of that, which pays myself to be a manager, so to speak. So for bookkeeping, for cleaning, for all of those other things that someone else would have to typically do are now on my shoulders that I have to do. So from a financial standpoint, it's higher, but I'm not working really any extra time outside of, say, for example, I have to take cardboard in, or have to haul garbage, or things like that, things that require me to show up at the shop and then leave. So yes, owning the dealership, I am capable of making more money. Is it a lot more money? No, because I still have to have the business running. But it does open up other possibilities, and other possibilities are for financial gain. So next year, I think, for the most part, I'll be working by myself. So maybe you bump yourself up in raise because of that, because you've got more responsibility at the shop, or maybe you set things up so that you would have a bonus at the end of the year, things like that, that I would typically pay out to the entire staff. So let's say, for example, loosely, if I was to pay myself a $500 bonus at the end of the year, and each of the boys that was working for me and Linda, the front desk, would get $250 rather than the two boys getting theirs, I would absorb that for myself, because now I'm doing all the work and they're not. So also, one thing that I don't do is I was paying my boys a commission based on the amount of labor that they put through. So we paid out 5% on labor, so each boy would get 2.5%. So if they had a base wage of $23 or $24 an hour, that would enable them to hit that $26 to $29 an hour based on their performance, which was always added incentive for them to work harder, right? Rather than standing around pushing a broom, go and create funds for the shop. Do I do mobile service for locals out there? I do few and far between things outside of the actual shop. An example that I did, and I think it's, if I'm out at my campsite, someone comes up and says, "Hey Jamie, can you come over and take a look at my boat?" Definitely, I'll go over and take a look at the boat. You know, kind of that PR thing, and you know, just being friendly. But if someone calls the shop and they say, and I just had a young lady call me the other day, and she asked if I could go out and take a look at her boat, and if she watches this, I'll give her a hello, Jessica. But I wasn't able, or I don't do that kind of thing, because the travel and the time, and I guess the prep that I would need in order to do those types of things is a little bit harder. If you're set up for it and you've got a trailer and you've got tools all separate and all those things are ready to go, that's a bit different. But to spend the time and put everything together, and you know, let's say for example it takes you an hour to put everything together, or that you think you're going to need, and then you end up going out there and you don't have everything you need, while you've wasted all this time. So it's always better for that customer to come into the shop. But on a side note, I have taken computers and things like that, so if a customer wants a readout on an engine, that's easy enough to do. So you just take the computer, hook it up, okay, this is what you, or what your fault is, or this how many hours you have on your engine, and away you go with that. So those types of things are a bit different. I suppose if I was out at the campsite, if someone said, "Hey, can you give me a hand taking a gear case off?" then yeah, I would do that. I don't know how much wrenches I would be throwing at that point, but I would definitely be more so a person that they could look to for advice at that time, and take the gear case off. I guess if they started to run into problems, I would at that point maybe step in and say, "Okay, you know, just let me do it, because it's probably going to go smoother." An example of that would be, I've had customers show up to the shop with Chrysler engines. So Chrysler engines, it's hard to put the gear case back on, because you have to line up the shaft at the top, but the crankcase itself, or not crankcase, the crank, I guess is what I want to say, kind of drops down, so it sits like this, and you can go on either side of the crank. So you'll lift it up in the place, and sure enough, you'll think you're getting it in, and you're not, because you're actually beside the crank. A lot of the other engines, like Johnson for example, really easy to put on, but Force and Chrysler, for most part, they were a little bit tougher to do. So I've had customers show up in the front yard and say, "Hey, I just, you know, I've worked at this for 3 or 4 days and I can't get the gear case back on." But through the years, what I've learned is you take that specific case and you let the drive shaft run along the aluminum. So if you're putting the drive in and it's going this way, you let the drive shaft run along here, right? And then once you get to where you believe the top is, you just tilt it a tiny bit and give it a push, and it goes in. But that took a long time for me to learn and to figure out. So when someone comes in after 3 days, and I'm 100% telling you 3 days that some guys have tried to put these gear cases on and invited friends over and had drinking parties to try and put these cases on as a contest. throwing it on inside of that 4 or 5 minutes for them is it's very impressive for them. But again, it's I've just done so many that it's kind of natural. Chris says, I'm considering selling my home, retiring from the automotive business, moving to the coast of South Carolina, and working as a mobile marine mechanic. What would you charge for fair hourly fee? Okay, so if you're going to work as a mobile technician, I think that actually opens you up to having a higher rate of pay. It also opens you up to mileage, so you'd be paid per kilometer that you drive out, and then of course the time spent, because you're creating a convenient structure for people. Now keep this in mind. Now this is really important. The amount of time and the amount of effort that it takes to haul a boat, for example, 300 miles or 300 kilometers or whatever, could be $100 to $200 to $300, because they got to go there to your shop and then they got to go back out to the lake. So it can be very costly to pull a boat that distance. So don't sell yourself short with the amount you want to charge. Now I get this, that at the start you're going to want to say charge a little bit less so that your name gets out there. I get it, and I respect that, but just remember, it's again, it's going to be your business, it's going to be your time, and it's what you feel that your time is worth. If you charge too low, there's always the chance that you won't get much business, or the business that you do get are people that don't want to spend a lot of money. They're, let's call them inexpensive people. With inexpensive people, we can have other things that crop up. For example, you show up and they say, well, you said it was going to be this much, now it's this much, I'm not going to give you that money, right? Just, you don't want to weed through your clients, but you just want to create a client base that you yourself can actually trust in, right? You build a repertoire of clients that you know they're going to pay, you know that they're going to respect the work you do, and you will respect them as customers. That's what you want to create for yourself. But what to charge? What would be a number you could charge? So our shop right now, we charge $150 an hour, right? Okay, now overhead is higher and things like that, and that's a little bit easier to explain to a customer when they call. You're going to find that when you go mobile, they're going to say, well, all you have is a van. You don't have lights, you don't have electricity and water and all these other things. But it's also the wear and tear on the vehicle. It's the time you're spending away from your family. And I get it, you would spend 8 hours away from your family anyway. So I guess that would really be an argument. But yeah, well, how much is it in your area right now for a marine technician? Or do you have an idea of what it costs right now out there, like in South Carolina? And keep in mind, if you're going to move to South Carolina and you're going to move to the coast, as you mentioned, you might run into a lot harder problems there than you would or be capable of doing, rather than being at a shop. So the reason I say that is you've got corrosion to take into account, right? So if you're living in South Carolina and a guy comes in, we default to the gear case because it's really popular. You can't get the gear case off because it's corroded in place, or you've got to do repairs on say, for example, you got to pull a bearing carrier out because you got to change a seal. The bearing carrier doesn't want to come out, so you're limited to things that you could actually do as a mobile technician, because you're going to need a vise, you're going to need a way to hold that gear case still, you're going to need torches, you're going to need pullers. So I guess you might have to be kind of dual purpose. You take the gear case off, you take it back to your shop, then you rip it apart. I really don't know. And then the other problem with being mobile is the fact that you're also going to need parts. And parts, what are you going to need, right? I guess the way I look at this is every year we sell a number of specific parts. So water pump impellers, gaskets, a lot of seals go. You're going to have to build up your repertoire of parts that typically sell the most, and you're going to have to carry some. Now, whether or not you get set up with, say, Mercury, or you get it set up with Yamaha, there are other options out there. So a company you can get set up, which will allow you to have aftermarket parts, and as well as some OEM parts, would be Land and Sea. So our rep up here his name is Craig. I don't know if he's going to be a different person for you down there, but you get a hold of the rep and you say, okay, this is what I want to do. And then this sets you up with oils, and it also sets you up with Mercury parts and whatever OEM parts, or sorry, aftermarket parts are sold, whether it's Sierra or CDI. So you can cover off parts as well. But again, it's knowing which parts you're going to need. So you're going to have to find out in that area, what do they charge inside their shops, and whether you want to come in just under or just over, or even charge the same. Perfectly fine. So you got to figure that out. And then you're going to have to figure out what parts you're going to need in order to be successful, because the whole idea of the mobile part of it is you go out there and you fix it right then on the spot to get them back on the water. Now keep in mind, if we go back to the first part of the stream, as I talked about today, is you might go out there to do a water pump, but you might need a seal kit by the time it's done. And keep that in mind. So now, do you invest in a water pump and a seal kit to go with a specific gear case? Or, and again, there could be specific water pumps or specific, obviously there's specific water pumps, specific seal kits that go with certain engines that don't apply to all of them. Right? So that walking that line of being mobile, I think it's great. But it would be better in combination if you had a localized place that you could work out of as well. I'm not saying that the customer has to bring their boat to your garage at your house. I'm just saying that you would have a space in your garage to take some of your stuff to. Or another option would be if you had a large enough trailer that you could haul, that you could work on and do these repairs. Now, another thing I'm going to quickly point out that is probably going to be overlooked, and we looked at we have in the past looked at mobile at the shop, right? So you get a 14 by 8 trailer or 16 by 8 trailer. It's got plenty of room. You can set up benches in it. You can put vices in it. You can carry parts in it. Then you work in it, and it's 40 degrees outside. What are you going to do about that, right? So I guess maybe some of the mobile stuff you'd want to make mobile to be more mobile than the mobile, so you can take it out and work on it. But I know that working inside of a trailer when it's our 40 degrees would maybe be around your 100 degrees, because I'm sure you're going to see things like that when you're in South Carolina. You're going to see really high temperatures. Even if it's 90 degrees, standing inside that working, it's going to be a sweat box, and it's going to be horrible to work in. So I don't know if you'd ever thought of that, but that's definitely something that you're going to want to keep in mind as well, is heat. But again, for your hourly fee, we'll bounce back to that real quick. Find out what they're charging and base it off what they're charging. Okay, so let's see here. Conversions, I've had, and I want to touch a little bit on this. I get asked every once in a while, someone will come in with a Yamaha stern drive. I had this happen just a while ago, and the customer, he comes in and he had it winterized, and I said, treat this thing like gold, because you can't get any of this stuff anymore. And he looked at me puzzled, and he says, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, they only made this drive for 4, 5, 6 years or whatever they made. They discontinued it. Now we can't get any parts. Oh. He says, well, should I sell it? And I said, well, if you sell it, then you just pass along that problem to someone else, right? So use it until it dies, or get rid of the boat and, as he had mentioned, and well, I guess make it someone else's problem, but you don't really want to do that. But his question then was, can I put a different drive on it? And I got to thinking that, I don't know if the coupler's the same. I know the outdrive and the way it attaches is different. So unless someone makes a conversion kit, the answer would be no. But the story doesn't end there. What if you recreated the transom and then adapted a new drive? And I think that is a possibility. But the other side of the coin then is the plausibility of spending that kind of money to do that and all that work is it worth it? Right? So that would be a, what, early 90s boat. Whether it's in fantastic shape or not, we don't know what it would look like underneath the floorboards. So it could be all rotted out, or it could be in good shape. The interior might be fantastic, but it's because it was covered all the time. And are you going to keep it covered? We don't know. It could deteriorate fairly quickly. But is a, say, a $4,000 or $5,000 boat worth rebuilding a transom to put a new drive on? Just, you know, something to think about. What are your guys' thoughts? What would you think of doing something like that, Chris? Would that be something that you would take on as a mobile technician? That's huge. It's a huge thing to do. Fiberglass work is always tough to do. So maybe minor repairs like that you might get away with scratches and things like that. But anything big, you're probably just going to have to pass along to someone else. Interesting. I also ask, or no, I don't ask. I get people that ask me about, well, an alternator's an alternator. Why can't I use this inside my stern drive? And the answer would be, well, there's two answers. Number one is, it would probably work. But number two is, what happens if you've got a fuel leak and you start up that alternator and it's not as fuel friendly as the marine stuff is? You go boom. So, yes, in a pinch, but not safely. Starters are the same, alternators are the same. A lot of the electronics are the same. They're just not certified for marine applications, so they don't really have any business going inside your boat. So, keep that in mind, that stuff does cross over. It's just not safe to cross it over. Right? Right. What do you do before launch day? So you're taking the boat to the lake, and what do you do? What do you guys do to get it ready? Let's say, for example, you're already at the lake. Okay, so you want to verify the life jackets are there, your stop switch is there. What else? What else do you guys look at? Do you look at, did you put your water or your plug in? That's important. What else? Remember, I'm not a guy that does a lot of boating, so a lot of this is foreign to me, other than when I would go with my father, and he would scold me for not putting things in, like life jackets or the key. Key. Take the key. That's very important. Let's gloss over that one. That's not really important. I'm sure you guys, if you guys own boats, you already know. What do I got? What's the future? What do I got for the future? Well, let's look at this. What do you guys? What's this? My hats came in. TMD hats. If I do sell these hats, these aren't expensive hats. I would probably charge, I don't know, $20 for this hat. It's a nice hat. I would appreciate if people wanted to buy them. It would be done probably through PayPal, and I would just mail them out to the customer, rather than obviously not carry them, because that would cost more than a hat. So if anyone's interested in hats, I do have some swag now, which we can get into. I will be making or purchasing other hats as well that are going to be a step up from this model. But if anyone wants to get in on the ground, for example, and have a hat like this, which would be one of the originals, I got them. I have 5 left, because I didn't buy a whole bunch, because I didn't know what these were going to look like once they got here. They're not embroidered. It's just kind of I don't know whether they glued the paint on, or I don't think they glued it on, but it's painted on in some form or some fashion. It's a comfortable hat. It's soft. It feels good on the head. But again, it's just not an expensive hat, so we're looking at about $20, PayPal, and I send it out. So that's one of the things that we're going to get into, is a little bit of swag for the channel to represent TMD, or if you're out on the water, represent me, as well as it's a great way to support the channel and the work that I do for you guys to repair your stuff. Fantastic. If outside of that, if you don't want to swag, there's memberships and there are super chats. Super chats would be donating money directly to the channel, and then asking questions or comments and just highlighting it with a super chat, which again pays me money and helps me do the content for you guys. What else did I have? There was something else that I wanted to tell you guys about. I've got upcoming videos that I'm looking at doing. I got one over here. The outline is marine engine repairs. So this is based on my ability to do them, not the actual. Actually, I could probably do both. My ability to do them as well as other people's ability to do them, the DIY guy. So, for example, if we said changing a fuel filter is a number one under certain circumstances. Now, there are other fuel, and we'll touch on this real quick here. There are other fuel filters that are out there that are definitely hard to change. Some of them are you have to utilize a oil filter wrench to get them off, and some of them are in bad places, so that would raise the difficulty. But typically changing a fuel filter is about a 1. Chris says, nobody works for me. I hate it. I want to specialize in outboards, stern drives, jet drives, GM inboards, and air conditioning in larger boats. Okay, now, that's fantastic, Chris. I 100% agree. Or appreciate your enthusiasm. But outboards, stern drives, jet drives, stern drives as far as would be your GM inboards, because you're not saying stern drives again. All of those require at points some specialized tools, as well as books, right? Service manuals, as well as the utilization of computers. So I think I would start off in a niche group, right? So I would maybe start off with outboards and a select brand of outboards so that you can accumulate tools that you might need outside of specialized tools, right? So you're going to go out and buy 2 sets of imperial wrenches and 2 sets of metric wrenches in case you need 2 at any point. So some gear cases, for example, would have a nut and a bolt that you have to take off at one point that one wrench won't work on, right? Things like that. But you could probably use a ton of stuff in crossover from outboards to stern drives, but you're still going to need to utilize certain tools for those. So let's say, for example, gimbal bearings. A lot of people will use a slide hammer to take a gimbal bearing out, but that's not how they're supposed to be taken out, right? If you use a slide hammer, you can damage the area that holds the gimbal in place, because if you don't pull it out straight, you can, what is the term? Gnarl the edge, or you can damage whatever's maintaining that gimbal in place. So you're going to have to buy some specialized tools. So, I would just be cautious with dumping too much money in at the start. I know it opens up more work for you, but it's just that. It can open up more work for you in a negative way that you can't handle. So, for example, you don't want to show up down at the lake and go, okay, we're ready to take this all apart, and all of a sudden you don't have everything that you need and you're at a standstill. So now you've driven an hour and a half to get to someplace, you've worked on it for an hour, and you're stuck. My Canadian wife wants to know what part of Canada you were in. If your Canadian wife is watching, I appreciate it. And let's have her take a guess at what part of Canada I'm in. So she should be able to, as she's lived in Canada, recognize the fact that I don't have a strong accent. I talk more like everyone else in North America, and my about doesn't sound like about. It does a little bit, but not a ton. So, Chris's wife, where am I from? How's that? Another video that I want to do, so there's marine engine repairs, and marine myths is what I want to get into as well. Talk about those. So there's a thing called, oh my goodness, Menendez? No, not Menendez. That's wrong. When we hear things from the past, no, Ontario. If I was in Ontario, it would be a boot. They still have a strong accent in Ontario. Mandela effect. That's what it is. The Mandela effect. So I was doing some research on the Mandela effect. So what that is let's say, for example, you watched the 007, right? James Bond. And at the end of the episode that had Jaws in it, he smiles at a girl. Okay? And when he smiles at the girl, everybody remembers that she either had braces or she had silver teeth. But She doesn't. She just has teeth, right? But everyone remembers that, oh no, she had silver teeth. I 100% remember it. So I'm going to get into a little bit of that with my myths and about the marine industry, because there are some myths out there that people believe are true that simply aren't. So I'm going to get and do a video on that. So BC is closer, right? Because the further we move out west, the less influence we have from the east as far as talking. But that would start from Manitoba and moving west. So I'm actually, to help you guys out, I'm actually from Saskatchewan is where I'm from. And from, obviously from the southern part of Saskatchewan, not north. If I was from northern Saskatchewan, I would again, in most cases, have an accent. Yeah, unfortunately your wife wasn't right. So we have up north we have the influence from Cree, we have the influence from Dene, and then we have English, and then we have French. So the further out from the city centers that we move, the more likely it is that we would have an accent that I can detect when I talk to people even, or it would be a different accent that you would hear in Canada. So as you move out east, I can detect strong accents from those people by some of the words that they utilize that we say here, but we say them differently. And it would be, we use about because it's the easiest one, but they more say about, right? It's instead of out, it's oot is what they utilize. But as we move west, we don't have that accent. But again, if we move outside of the city centers, there's more a more variety of different languages out there that influence the way people talk. So it's not as much as using different words. It would be the same words. They're just pronounced differently. It's kind of strange. I guess if an example in the United States would be perhaps the further south you go, the more southern drawl you might hear based on that specific area, right? But if you could move to other areas, even if it's down south, you won't have that accent. It'll be more of a North American type accent, which is, well, more so like TV is, right? And I think living where we are in Saskatchewan and not having that influence in Saskatchewan where I am, we don't have the influence of the northern communities. So majority of the English that we learn or accents that we would have been picked up from television, if that makes any sense. Now, just because someone does live out east doesn't mean that they do talk like us. Again, it's going to come down to the influences that were around them. So, Chris, if you're down in South Carolina, for example, I would probably hear you talk a little bit different than I do, just as you can hear me talk a little bit different than you do. Again, based on how you were raised and things like that. So, I have a question. Why would an impeller fail faster than people actually believe it would? So, a spinning piece of rubber inside of a stainless steel housing, why would it wear out faster than people believe? Reasons for this would be dry start. So even if we drop our engine into the water, it doesn't necessarily mean that water gets to the pump immediately. The air has to be pushed out, then the water displaces the air that was in there, and then as the impeller spins, now we've got that layer of water between the rubber and the steel. Or we run it on water muffs, we don't get adequate water flow at that point, or we pick up something in the lake and it shuts off the water that's available to the impeller. So that's why we want to change that impeller every 3 years, and it wouldn't hurt in between based on using it to check every once in a while. For example, driving through sand, right? Sandy conditions, you'll want to check it more often. Starting the engine out of the water, ask me how I know. Yep, it happens. It happens. Yeah, I watched a video, and yeah, I can't for the life of me remember who the person was, but they were in a cruiser out on the water, and they overheated the engine, and they took the engine up to 220 degrees, and that cooked the engine. And I got to thinking. I've had stern drives that come in that go over that, and they've gone over that because the paint is discolored, all the rubber's been melted. They're in bad shape, but they've never actually seized the engine. And I got to thinking, was that really the reason that this engine failed? Was it overheated? Like, if you ran at 220, I would expect for an extended period of time, we could have issues like this. But up here in Canada, we'll run engines in the winter at 195 degrees, for example, with no issues. So would the difference of 25 degrees make that much of a difference in the running ability of the engine to the point where it fails? Or was there an underlying condition on this engine and he just jumped to that conclusion? Because they actually seized the engine is what happened. Now, what I'm thinking, or the possibility, is this. It was raw water cooled. Raw water cooled, so they had antifreeze, right? I wonder if it got hot, it blew the exhaust gasket, and then antifreeze got in and hydrolocked the cylinder. That would be my guess at what happened. But they also showed later on the guy attempting to spin this engine over, and he couldn't spin it over by hand with the spark plugs and stuff out. It was just interesting to me. As how they would explain this failure without really going too far into it. Or did the antifreeze get inside the block, or did they maybe have a cracked block to begin with and antifreeze seized it up that way? I don't know. It was just kind of a weird video to watch with the explanation of what was going on. I would rather watch a video, and I guess it's because I'm in the industry of finding out what the actual failure was rather than glossing over it and just stating something that you believe might have been. And what kind of really irks me is when I watch shows or movies, for example, and what they do with a boat motor is just completely and utterly far-fetched. Or if they state something that's just completely wrong, that's not possible. That kind of stuff irks me. It's like they didn't do enough research into why something would fail, or using it a certain way, what would happen. Stuff like that. It irks me, not to the point where I'm going to lose sleep over, but it's just things that I notice. So, Chris, you say, ask you how you know, and how about you tell me how you know about starting the engine without water? I know that every once in a blue moon, you'll forget to turn the water on. And that's definitely something that we attempt to not do at the shop when we run stuff on the muffs, is not turn on the water. But it's inevitable. Every once in a while it can happen. Or, for example, you'll turn the water on and not notice that you parked the guy's trailer on top of the hose. That happens. Just because the temp gauge reads 220 doesn't mean another part of the engine is running hotter from a blockage. Yeah, that's right. So what we could do is I think Volvo does this the correct way. They actually put sensors on the exhaust, which is probably going to give you a better idea of what the actual temperature of the engine is running at. So of course they would be different types of pickups to do that, because they're not going to go off at 130 degrees. Or do they? Let me think. That is water cooled back there. So maybe those are still sensing that it's 130 degrees, or 140 or 145. Yeah, maybe so. Maybe I'm incorrect with my first assumption. Yeah, it's water cooled, so it would still be. I think that would be a better place to actually do that testing rather than on the water pump housing, because you're right. If we have a blockage somewhere, we could still read 130 for a period of time while we would run, 220 for a period of time prior to the temperature going up from there. That is a possibility, yes. Interesting. So, why do boats run exhaust risers? So stern drives, why do they have exhaust risers in them? So if you've got a stern drive, you've got your log that sits this way, and then it goes up, over, and down. So it's not to restrict the flow of exhaust, which I guess it kind of does, because anytime we turn exhaust, we restrict it. But for the most part, what it's actually there for is to stop water from coming into the engine. So Mercury has a couple versions of risers that I've seen through the years. We've got a 3, I guess there'd be more, a 3-inch, a 6, I guess it's a 3, is it 6 and 9? 3, 6 and 9, or 6 and 9? I can't remember for sure. Anyway, so on the ones with the really tall risers, and again, this is what Volvo does really well, they put a tall riser on, which prevents that water from getting back into the engine as we stop on the water, because we get that big push of water as we stop that will go into the drive up and then into the engine. So they run a taller one, so they don't actually have to run flappers, whereas Mercury runs flappers, and the flappers, they sit and they open like this. As the water comes in, it would push it open. As the exhaust goes by, it closes it, right? So then the exhaust pushes past. So that's why we're running those risers. If anyone else has any other reasons to run those risers, let me know in chat. But yeah, I think pretty sure that's why we're running risers in those things. What do we got here? Compression testing, I've touched on this a ton in my videos. I bought a new scope this couple weeks ago, so I hope to have that on some of the videos. It actually takes a better, larger picture than my original scope did, and it's clearer. So I should be able to give you guys some more insight on what it looks like inside of the cylinders prior to or instead of taking the heads off. Now, and I've mentioned this tons of times already, compression is an okay of checking the condition of the cylinders, but the best way is to look inside them and knowing what to look for. So cross hatching still in place, fantastic. No rust, no shiny spots, no dull spots. Ideally, if you just see scratches in there and they're all kind of running at 90 degrees, you know, X's or whatever all through, that's what you want. You don't want scoring running perpendicular to the piston by any means. But yeah, if you're looking to buy something used, you always want to, if you can, look inside the cylinders. It wouldn't hurt to stop in it at a place, maybe spend $150, $200 or whatever it is, $40, depends where you get it. Pick up a scope, take the spark plugs out, look inside and see what those cylinders look like. You could even email me the pictures, send me the pictures somehow. I can look at them and go yay or nay. Right? There are other ways that we can look inside those and verify buying used engines. Oil analysis, I've never really got into that kind of stuff. Never really had to use that kind of smoking gun to see what the failure was. Would be interesting. I guess you could find out if a person's engine is having difficulties before it really starts. But it's one of those things, I guess, if you've already got metal shavings or metal content in the oil and it's above what it should be, you probably already have a problem anyway. Let's see. Chris says, years ago, I was installing an alternator kit on an outdated factory charging unit on an old Mer Cruiser. The magnets broke off the flywheel. I was so excited to see how the new setup would work. So, you put an outdated factory charging unit on an old Mer Cruiser, so the magnets broke. So you must be talking about a 470 or Mercury's inline 4, not the 3 liter or 2.5 liter. The, what the heck was it? 3.7 liter. Oh, you forgot to turn the water back on in that one. So that particular engine has to have water running through it because the regulator is water cooled and will cook really quick. But yeah, the magnets would come off. So what Mercury attempted to do, this would have been mid to late 80s, maybe into the early 90s. They came out with an engine that was a 3.7 liter, and in order to get as much horsepower out of it, they they took the alternator off and they went with a stator. So the stator sat on the very front of the engine, and its magnets that just went around some coils, right, like on outboards. So that was an issue. So that would fail. That would overheat because it wasn't able to cool properly, as well as it ran through a regulator, and the regulator was water cooled, which would have issues. So if you didn't run water through it, of course it cooked because it was putting out a lot of current. Was it a 40 amp, 60 amp charging? So that they get hot, right? And that would cook, and right away you'd be replacing that. Now later on, they came out with brackets that you could add on to those existing engines that would allow you to run an alternator. So then you could take the regulator off and just run the hose instead of the regulator, as well as you take the, you could leave this, well, no, I guess if you leave the stator in place, you're still going to have a draw on the engine because of the magnets. So if you took the stator off, you'd probably be better. Pop that flywheel cover back on and away you go. Or flywheel or cover back on, yeah. So my understanding is that engine was half of a 460, I think is what I was told through the years, or that's what they referenced on when they originally had it built. But yes, it was the 3.7 liter Ford. Was it a good engine? I don't know. I would have appreciated that engine a lot more if they didn't put the closed cooling on it. If they just would have left it as fresh water, just like a 3 liter, for example, less things to go wrong, and probably would have functioned better. But I think their goal was to maybe have that as a saltwater based engine. We didn't see a lot of them on the prairies for good reason. It was there was no need for them. It was, but by the time anyone was really wanting that engine, V6s were starting to come out, and I think a lot more in my area in that era, we saw a lot more OMC products still at that point. We were still seeing tons of that white drive. And then Cobra came out. They ran a 2.5 liter stern drive. So yes, it was less power, but typically speaking, it was in a lighter boat. So the 3 liter's better, but the 3 liter, I wish it was stronger. It's a nice platform if it's put into the correct boat. But through the years, in order to keep costs down and keep, boats less expensive, 3 liters, or a lot of them, were put into wrong boats. And it even went as far as cutting down on the quality of the boats. And believe it or not, that's going to be one of the myths that we're going to touch on later on, is the myth of Bayliner, for example. Bayliner, don't hate me for saying it, but perhaps your boats weren't as good as you thought. But what they would do is they would put that 3 liter into those boats, and to make them faster or more efficient, they would, let's say you got what you paid for. How does that sound? I guess that's the way to say it. Constantly fixing the 3.7 liter. Yeah, I want to say that was an issue. Again, they didn't run electronic ignition on them. I don't know if they ever did. Every one that I've ever seen is standard ignition unless someone's put something else on. And one of the downfalls of running standard ignition was if you had kids playing in the boat and they're playing start the engine, but they're not starting the engine, they're just putting it to the on position. If your points are closed, it cooks the ignition and then engine doesn't work. Also, another thing that I've noticed with stern drives, and this is on the older models, I think more so is on the 3.7 liters I've seen it on, and the 2.5 liters, is when the voltage regulator fails inside the alternator, you'll cook your points. And it's a really interesting fail, because the engine will be working fine, the batteries are being charged, you're driving down the lake, and all of a sudden, shuts off. Right? Engine cools down, it restarts. It's just really weird, but it gets progressively worse as you go. So eventually the engine doesn't start at all. But it's the too much power getting through to the points, and the points overheating and actually glowing red, and it takes them out. The one wire, the alternator kit with the bracket actually worked great. Yep. So basically all it needed to know is that or no, yeah, I guess the way that one worked, there was no exciter wire. The alternator just started spinning and creating current at that point. And that's kind of like when you're working on one of those on the bench. So let's say in the old years, the olden days, we talk about one of those alternators you could put on the bench and you could give it a spin and know that it was going to work. You didn't have to supply an excite wire to tell it to work, which is what all the newer stuff comes with. Is it has to know the engine's running, has to know that there's voltage, all these other things. And I don't know. I guess there'd be a limited voltage regulator in there so that we could only get an amount of charge out of those. Because I don't think they actually referenced the amount of voltage that they were charging outside of the regulator had just set a set voltage, right? So they might have a peak of 14 volts, whereas something with a voltage regulator that's smart, for example, might see 15 or high 14s, for example, to charge faster, or so that you could run more things at any given time. I have seen on outboards overcharging situations where it'll set on Johnson Evinrude product, it'll set off the alarm if the voltage goes too high. So at idle speeds we didn't notice it, but as you would rev it up, the voltage regulator might pump out 16 or 17 volts and set the alarm off. I don't know if that was a fail-safe or that was just a thing that was happening, but that's what it was. I've also seen more so on the 40, 50, 60 platform of Mercury, that the voltage regulators, they're supposed to peak at 14.5 or thereabouts, because that's what the electronics are only able to handle. But I've also seen them when they run at 14.5 knock cylinders out on the engine because something is going wrong. Something is being confused inside the ECM because the voltage is too high, or maybe something is being backfed. Something's going wrong and the voltage is too high and the ECM just doesn't work properly and it cuts out cylinders. That was hard to figure out, because we had the spark would go down on the cylinder and you're like, well, the coil's had it. So you grab a new coil, you throw it on there. And then the next coil out. And then the next one, you're like, well, gee, how can this thing be blowing all these coils out on these things? But the coils weren't being blown out. It was just randomly selecting a cylinder to not operate anymore. So then finally, I got into checking the voltages and found that, oh, gee, we're at 14.5, which is the higher limit of what we're supposed to. So what we did was, I think at that point, he was running a bad battery, and this was allowing the voltage to have to go too high. We stopped in our shop battery, which is fully charged. It dropped down to 13.7 volts. Engine ran lickety-split. It was just a really weird thing that he accidentally found out, that it wasn't actually the voltage regulator at that point. The guy's battery just wasn't working properly anymore. So the alternator the regulator was trying its hardest to charge it. I believe that Chris says, I believe the alternator had its own regulator based off automotive applications. Say, it would have had to have had a regulator in it, otherwise it would have charged to I don't say infinity, but it would have charged too high. So they would have had to have a peak regulator on there to stop it from overcharging. They would have 100% would have had to. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, we'll use Chrysler. Chrysler did it. Was Johnson? Yep, Johnson did it. So if you only had a rectifier on your outboard, so what the rectifier would do is it changes the AC current over DC, which would allow you to charge your battery. You had to run a maintenance-free battery, because if you didn't, there was the possibility of the battery blowing up from being overcharged, because there was no brain box in the rectifier to tell it to stop charging. Then they introduced the regulator. We still run a maintenance, no, we don't run a maintenance. Oh, hang on, no. Whoa! Stop! You couldn't run a maintenance-free battery because it would blow up. You had to run a deep cycle battery. That's what it was. Sorry, I mixed that up. So ignore what I said before, because it was wrong. You had to run a deep cycle marine battery because a maintenance-free battery would blow up. So that's why if you've got an old boat, you gotta be super careful what battery you use, because you can overcharge it and you can cause it to blow up. Chris says, what people seem to fail to realize now, new charging systems are designed to maintain batteries instead of charging them, with both automotive and marine. Let me think about that. So, yes and no. Okay, so that would be based on the amount of charge that's available for charging. Now, I'll use my truck as an example because we can look at the automotive industry. My truck, when I'm driving back from my campsite, when I originally start the engine, we'll charge it, say, 14.5 volts. Okay? As I'm driving, you'll see the voltage start to drop down, and it'll maintain 12.5 volts. So the first time I saw this happening, I'm going, oh man, I need a new alternator. What the heck's going on here? Until I did some research and found out that at that point, it's maintaining that battery to the specific level it needs to be. It doesn't need to charge any higher. So we would do this for one of two reasons. Number one, the alternator is going to last longer. And number two is if we're not outputting as high of charge, we're not putting as much of a drain on the engine, right? And therefore we're not burning as much fuel. So maintaining in that aspect makes a lot of sense, okay? But as for the outboards are based on RPM. So whether we're belt driven with an alternator or we've got a regulator, it'll take whatever it's being fed and convert that to electricity and put it in. So that's why when we look at our manuals, we'll have at a certain RPM, right? We've got a amount of voltage that we're creating or charge that we've got creating. Once we start to get above that, we see a higher amount of charge and then a highest amount of charge, say at full throttle. So I'm going to agree with part of what you're saying there, Chris, with regards to it will maintain. If it's built into the software, for example, it'll maintain. If it's not built in, it's just going to do what it believes it's supposed to do and just flow current. Now, the regulator should be smart enough to vary that amount of current. So when a battery is discharged, it'll charge higher than normal, right? So maybe we'll see 14.2 volts. As it starts to cap off the amount of voltage, it'll slow, or the amount of charge that it doesn't need to have, it'll drop down to say 13.7, right? Which would be, I guess, maintaining, right? But if you took another battery and hooked it up at the same time and the battery was low and the other battery was fully charged, you're going to bleed from one battery to the other and then charge at a higher rate to supply the voltage that is needed for both of those to refill or to charge them. So interesting comment. So I'm going to wrap things up here because, well, it's been over an hour and I got to get my day underway and see what my wife wants to do. Last week we went shopping, so maybe she wants to do a bit of that today, so I'll do that. So we'll touch back on hats. So swag you guys can buy now, like I said, about $20. PayPal, mail it out. I'm going to get some other stuff, hopefully. Well, it's not going to say Lucky brand on it, but it'll be TMD based. Oh, wait, Chris has something else to say. Because you have so many electronics on a car now and the 12-volt systems are outdated, it can't keep up. If you check your battery voltage in the middle of winter, it will always be low. Okay, so up here where we freeze in the winter, if you're not talking about the battery specifically, Chris, and we're talking about the engine being charged, we're always going to see in the winter a high amount of charge because the battery is always dwindling and getting lower due to the drain on it or the amount of drain that's put on it from us starting the engine, right? So even at idle times, we're going to see a higher amount of charge than we typically would see in the summer because it's harder to keep that battery fully charged. So, for example, in the winter, we would run cords to our vehicles to keep the vehicle warm. And sometimes we would even run a battery blanket to the battery to keep it warm, right? So that it doesn't freeze and it's healthier for starting. What we need to remember is in the winter, A, again, it's harder to start, and B, we're probably not utilizing our vehicles as much because, well, that in our area, right? Because it's miserable outside and they might sit for a couple days. The electronics are going to drag the battery lower than an old standard ignition would, because with the standard ignition, you shut off and everything is just simply disconnected from the battery. So I had an H2, a Hummer H2 a few years ago before I got my new truck. If I let my Hummer sit for 2 or 3 days in the winter, battery was toast. I know, you're saying, well, the battery was no good. I was on battery number 3. I had checked for parasitic drains. I checked connections. I checked everything. It just pulled the battery down based on the fact that the ECM always required power, right? So that little 2 amp draw might only be 2 amps, but in the course of sitting for a few days, it would pull it down far enough that we couldn't even start the engine the next day. And another problem we have is, for some reason, the automotive industry hasn't figured this out, is when we turn the key to start the engine, why are you turning the headlights on? Why is at that point my heater coming on, my fan coming on? Why is the radio coming on? Why is any of that stuff automatically turning on when I go to start my engine? None of that stuff should be happening. So if we've got a minimal amount of charge that's left on our battery that we could have started our engine, well, the interior light was on, the front lights were on, the tail lights were, or the running lights were on, the stereo turned on. Like, gee whiz, like, think about it, guys. How hard would that be? I guess what I'm saying is the alternator can't keep the battery fully charged because of the software in ECM, because the manufacturer is worried about fuel mileage. Oh, yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. When it drops down to that 12.5 volts or 13 volts or what have you. But, yeah, I guess what is the option then? Does a person take a trickle charger every once in a while and hook it up to their battery to charge it? Which reminds me, I got to go up to the shop because I'm actually doing that with my Corvette right now, and I left the charger on it. Oops. I didn't leave it at 2. I left it at 12. Hopefully the charger knows to shut off. I don't think it's a smart charger. And for a split second, I'm thinking the guy that turned it on wasn't a smart charger either. Oh, something to do today. We'll have to go through and shut that off. But hey, should be charged because it was low. And I had some issues with it through the year too. So again, an ECM dragging it down because it's always on. Oh, and I don't know if you guys knew this, but I was having issues with my heater wasn't working properly in my Corvette. The fan wouldn't turn on, so I replaced the fan because the squirrel cage in the fan was chirping anyway, so it had to come out. And then I changed out the resistor pack. It was inexpensive, and every time I did something, it would work for a day or two, and then it would stop working. What I finally found out was underneath in the footwell, there's a ground block that has, I don't know, 10 or 12 ground wires that run to it. And that's where the problem was. So I went in there, cleaned it up, shook it up, did some work to it. And lo and behold, heater works. Fan works all the time. So I got one more thing I have to look at now is when I'm putting it into reverse, my backup camera is supposed to be coming on, and my backup camera is not coming on for some reason. So I got to look into that next. Is it another ground wire? Something came loose? Something corroded? I don't know. But every once in a while it comes on and then it doesn't. What I'd like to do is, or what I want to do is, let me start over. I hooked the camera up to my brake light, not my brake lights, my backup light. So when my light comes on for the backup lights, it tells my camera to come on. But I'm not fast enough to put my car into reverse and then run behind it to see if my backup light is on. Gotcha. Yeah, who the heck would do that? Anyway, I'm going to take off, guys. I appreciate everyone watching, and I've got a compilation video dropping on Tuesday, which is my birthday. Thank you. Happy birthday, me. On Tuesday, it's a compilation of some of the rant videos that I did. I think there's 5 of them inside the video. So I would appreciate if you guys watch that and comment below if you like that sort of thing with the compilations. It is videos that you guys have possibly seen before, but I've just run them over in a nice collective package for you guys. Anyway, Chris, thanks for following along and chatting with me. I appreciate it. Say hi to your wife, and I will see you guys